and holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Communications and a Master of Leadership Development with a concentration in nonprofit management. She's moved from direct service to survivors of interpersonal violence to nonprofit management and fundraising. She's helped to secure literally millions of dollars for both local and national organizations, and is currently was most recently her role was as the National Grants and Foundations Director for the Arthritis Foundation, the National Arthritis Foundation. She now supports nonprofits in various capacities through the Reister Non-Profit Solutions, focusing on working with organizations that prioritize people and investments in their community. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jenny, and we'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, you can put those in the chat, and she will lead us through, I'm sure, what's going to be a very helpful presentation. Thanks, Jenny.
Hi, everybody. I hope you guys all are staying cool. Thanks for the waves, people who waved. I am dropping a link in the chat, and it is to a Google Drive folder. In the Google Drive folder are PDF files of the slides we're going to go through today. You know, one of the fallbacks of a virtual presentation is usually the slides are more dense because you're trying to get more information in a not face-to-face format. So there's a color version and there is a grayscale version. So if you want to print it, I didn't want you to have to mess with all the settings. So there's two versions. There are also two other documents in there that we'll get to a little bit later. But if you want to have the slides out, or if you want to look at them later, or certainly for people who watch the recording later, Betsy or Daniel, if they need copies of it and are unable to get it, let me know, and I will make sure that they can have copies of it as well. So I will share my screen, and we will all cross our fingers that technology stays with us in this moment, moment of great import. For some unknown reason, I'm unable to see the chat right now. So Betsy or Daniel, if you can tell me if there are questions that pop into the chat. The bubble was up, but it went away. So
yeah, I'll do that.
So I am Jenny Reister, and first and foremost, thank you all so much for coming. I know you all have a million things to do that aren't necessarily this, and I really appreciate it. And also everything that you guys do. As Betsy said, I kind of in the last 6 months or so have come back from a national perspective to work with smaller nonprofits that really work with people and work with missions and are focused on the communities in which they live and grow. Not that national nonprofits don't have a place, but I am much more inspired by people who had a passion or saw a need and are working to fill that need. So thank you all so much for coming, and thank you all so much for the work that you do, especially the last 2 years with the pandemic and the current situation with rising prices and all the uncertainty. Organizations like yours are so crucial for communities. So Betsy kind of covered most of this. I live in Indianapolis. I live about 10 minutes from the Speedway. The Speedway is kind of where everybody knows a place in Indianapolis. We're about 10 minutes west of the Speedway. I graduated from Purdue and St. Mary of the Woods College, both of which are in Indiana. However, my mother's people are from Eastern Kentucky, so we went there a lot in the summer. They're mostly from Renfro Valley, but also a little out toward Hazard and London, out that way. So in the summers, we went down there a lot. So I'm reasonably familiar with Eastern Kentucky. I have a lot of good memories from there from when I was a kid. I've worked in nonprofit for about 20 years. I started in direct service. I was an advocate, working with the police department, and then throughout the years have done different things, and do a lot of program planning, evaluation, strategic planning, internal processes, procedures, written processes and procedures, a lot of grant writing, also some now corporate giving, faith-based giving, those kind of items for certain clients that I have. I've worked with literally on a volunteer basis, like startup projects. Someone emailed me and said, I have an idea. Can you help me write my mission statement? And how do I get a 501c3 and all these things? All the way up to, the Arthritis Foundation had a $70 million budget. So I've worked in a lot of different capacities, and kind of everything in between. I have places I've worked with that are $100,000. I have people that are like in that $700,000 range, $2 and $3 million range. So it's a big range, and it's interesting how different they are, but there are a lot of commonalities between large and small organizations. I love what I do. I love helping people. I love meeting people. I love talking. Betsy will tell you that I am a big talker. I will talk as long as anyone will listen to me. And so it's always great to be able to come out and do stuff like this. Again, I am much better in person than I am, see my hair on the camera mess up, than I am on virtual, because I like to have that kind of give and take and feedback, and that's hard in this environment, but it is the best way to reach people. So we do it, and it makes a lot of sense. Just a word on accessibility. This template I moved to about 6 months ago because it is modified for people in virtual audiences who have low vision. So that's why the slides and pictures are the way they are, with contrast and identifications and things like that. So if any of you are low vision, it should be compatible as far as I know. And but that's just it's not as like flashy as a lot of PowerPoints are in person. But it's for a very specific reason, to increase accessibility. So Betsy stole my thunder on this one. She said who all is in the organization location. That's fine. And you know, we have a diverse group of people. So we're gonna have 2 polls, which I won't be able to see the results of because I can't find the chat box. But Daniel will put them up, and the first one is here. I can see the poll, yay. For those of you who are from a school, I saw a couple of you are from an organization, an educational organization. You can pick C. That's probably as close as it will be to what you actually are.
And if the poll is covering the questions, A is we provide direct services to vulnerable people in our community, like a food pantry, shelter, or housing. B, we strive to improve conditions in our community to benefit residents. For example, improving green spaces, libraries, beautification efforts. C, we are a convening or intermediary organization to benefit people or communities, like a coalition, task force, or network. And can you see the poll, Jenny?
Yeah, I can see the poll.
Okay. Okay, I think we got 100% participation.
Yay. So it looks like most of you are a convening organization or intermediary, like a coalition or a task force. And then we have a few people who are improving communities. And we have a couple who are direct service providers. For the 2 people who said none of the above, can you come off mute and just say really quickly kind of what you do? If you're listening. Okay. Well, whoever the 2 people who said none of the above, if you want to share kind of what you do in the chat box, please do, so we kind of have an idea of who is in the room with us. And that should be all for that one. And then the next question, what best describes your personal experience, not necessarily at the organization you're with now, your personal experience with grant proposal writing?
So A is I have written grants on my own and feel highly comfortable with the process. B, I've helped others write grants and feel reasonably comfortable. C, I have never written a grant, but have worked with them in other capacities, in which, like reporting, research, etc. And D, the idea of grants gives me nightmares, and I do not feel comfortable with any part of it. I think there should be a qualifier for that last one, Jenny, that federal grants sometimes give me nightmares.
Yeah, and we talk about the different kinds of grants, but government grants are a whole different dynamic. However, the chat box is just turned to my screen for some serious reason. So yeah, I can see the chat now. I think everybody has responded, and it looks like the majority of you, actually, the majority of you feel highly comfortable with the process, which is fantastic. And then there are a lot of people who are in the middle that feel reasonably comfortable or have worked with a grant in some capacity. And then there are a couple people who have the nightmare scenario, which again, like Betsy said, it kind of depends on the grant, but getting started with grants is hard. I mean, it's just hard. But we'll get through some of that stuff now. But thank you you guys for letting me know kind of who's in the room and how all of that is the level of comfort everybody has.
Mindy in the chat says she wants to say both A and D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really common. So it's, you know, you may be comfortable with it. And again, it varies widely. Grants are not all similar sometimes. Like federal grants are extremely detailed. A Walmart grant takes 4 minutes to fill out. It's 4 boxes. So there's a lot of variation in there. And again, I can see the chat box now. As a reminder, anything you put in the chat box, unless you select something different, will be seen by everybody. So okay. If you want to ask me a question, just me, make sure you select just me. If you're going to talk trash about me, please don't let me see it. Send a direct message. So will this grant make me a grant writing expert? No, it will not. If that's why you came here, I'm very sorry. You know, we have about 90-ish minutes of content and some time built in for questions and things. But this is kind of an introduction and kind of a breakdown of how most grant proposals work. I still go to trainings for grant writing. I've been doing grant writing for 12 years now. I still go to trainings and skill development sessions to learn about it. I don't know that I would ever, I don't know that you can get to be an expert in grants. Grants is changing all the time. Like how grants look from when I started, the things they ask for, how things are worded. It's completely different than it was when I started. So you will not be an expert, but you will have an increase in knowledge, I hope, and have a little bit of fun and learn some stuff. Thank you, Shane, for your hurry this up already message. So the agenda today, we're talking about the types of grant funding, proposal preparation, common proposal elements, general tips for successful grant writing. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Again, I'll share my email at the end if you have like kind of a specific question, but you can always put it in the chat. You can always send it to me. So types of grant funding. There are a few different types of grant funding. Foundation grants, which are tend to be kind of what a lot of organizations, especially small organizations, will seek out. And the reason for that is pretty simple. They're much more focused on a narrow either geographic region or a topic, and so it's not as competitive. These are managed by a private foundation, which could be an individual, it could be a family, it could be a company, or it could be a charity. For instance, some churches actually have a separate foundation. Foundation, by its definition, it's part of the tax code. If you are a foundation, you operate under certain tax codes, you operate under certain behaviors and qualifications and those kind of things. Typically, they require either a letter of intent or a formal application process, which vary, again, widely from foundation to foundation. Some, it's just that it's a one-page letter telling us what you want with your ask in it. Some of them are online. Some of them are, a longer situation. Some require an invitation to apply for an award. This is where foundations get a little bit tricky because some of them have pre-selected applicants, and they don't really open that pool up very often. If you run into a foundation that you've never worked with before and that you feel you're strongly aligned with, one of the things you can do is send them a letter of introduction. This is a letter where you don't ask for money, you don't ask for anything. You simply say, I recently came across your foundation. Here's a high-level view of what we do. Here's how I think it aligns with your foundation's priorities. I would love to talk to you if possible. And in my experience, about 20% of the time, 25% of the time, you'll get an invitation to talk to somebody. And sometimes that results in an invitation to apply. And that's very good. The good thing about invitation-only foundations is usually once you are in, you are in. So you can keep applying year over year. Sebastian, did you have a question? Your hand is up. Okay, it went away. These applications are usually shorter, 3 to 8 pages and straightforward. There's a lot of just very straightforward questions. What are you going to do? How much money do you need to do it? And they don't require a lot of the other detail that federal grants require to apply. They're usually 1 year, one-time awards to organizations. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes it's a quarterly award, but usually they're 1 year, one-time awards. You occasionally will have multi-year foundation awards, but especially on like non-research lower end of the award spectrum. It's although most foundation grants are between $500 and $75,000, there are certainly foundations that are in the millions of dollars. Those are usually kind of large scale medical research or large scale capital projects that are being funded. You know, especially in larger areas like New York and San Francisco, they have very large foundations that fund things. The Carnegie Foundation is one of them. So there are some larger foundation grants, especially if you have a collaborative effort. You know, here in Indy, we have Lilly. Eli Lilly is based here, so there's a large Lilly endowment, which will give away high-end grants, several $100,000, $1 million. But the average foundation grant that you are going to encounter day to day is going to be in this kind of range. Most require minimal reporting or no reporting at all. That's one of the tricks, we'll talk about that a little bit later, of when you're looking at a grant to see if it's a good fit, whether it's government, whether it's foundation or anything else, is what are the reporting requirements? Because sometimes the reporting requirements are more work than the actual project for which you are applying for funds. So government grants, which to be honest, government grants are kind of a beast onto their own. I could do like a 2-day, 8-hour each day training on just government grants and all the headaches that ensue with government grants. But a quick overview is these are things funded by local, state, or federal governments. You know, if your local township has grants or your city has a grant, state and federal grants. A lot of state grants are actually federal grants. They are money that the federal government gives to states, and states administer on their own as block grants or pass-through grants, depending on how they word it. Usually the government will issue a formal solicitation with specific details. And if any of you have ever seen a solicitation for a federal government grant, it's usually 25 to 30 pages long, just the information you need to apply. Sometimes they're called RFPs, sometimes they're called NOFOs, which is a notice of funding opportunity. Sometimes they're called NOFUs, which is a notice of funding availability. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, just as an FYI, is a federal government grant. So if your organization has any cap on federal government grants and you're going to apply for a CDC grant, that does count towards your federal government, federal funding cap. These awards, especially local awards, range from $25,000 to several $1 million, depending on who is funding it and what they're funding. Some of them are 1 year, some of them are multi-year. A lot of federal grants are on 3-year cycles. There's a few 5-year, but most of them are on a 3-year cycle. State and local grants, a lot of times are on a 1-year cycle. And so you apply every year. Or sometimes you're able to just apply for a renewal on local and state grants, which makes things a lot easier because it's like one page as opposed to 75 pages. Partnerships are very common and often required for government opportunity. The reason for that is the government wants to ostensibly give money to as many organizations to benefit programs, and collaboration has been shown to work. This is beneficial to smaller nonprofits because if there's a larger nonprofit you can partner with, they can kind of do the heavy lifting on the reporting, the financial reporting, and the tracking, and all of those things, and you can do the work and submit invoices to them if they're the lead agency. It makes it a little bit easier. But partnerships are extremely common and sometimes even required. You have to have a minimum partner, or they'll tell you what kind of partner you need. You have to have a partner that's in a school. You have to have a partner that's law enforcement. You have to have a partner that is part of the USDA. So they'll tell you what kind of partners you need. Applications are very, very detailed and lengthy. They're usually 45 to 75 pages long for all the materials. But federal grants are tricky because they'll say, oh, it's a 20-page narrative. And you're like, oh, a 20-page narrative, including all this information? That seems pretty easy, double-spaced. But then they're like, here's all the attachments that we need. The budget's 5 pages long. The memorandum of understanding is 14 pages long. So don't be fooled by how long they tell you the narrative is, because it's probably double that at least in the end. If awarded, details reports are due either monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually. It again depends on the grant and who is distributing the funds. Also, usually there are bifurcated reports. So there are reports on the program or project, and then there are financial reports. The financial reports, especially for state and federal governments, are usually monthly because they constantly have to check for fraud. They have to check for auditing purposes and those kind of things. If you have a federal government grant that is longer than 3 years, they paused this in 2020 and 2021, but I believe it's back in effect now. You will undergo an audit by them during the 3-year or more cycle that you have the grant. It is not an audit like the IRS audit. It is them sending a site manager to look through your records and make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do, talking to your partners and making sure everyone is actually working on this project. So it is, it's a high reporting threshold, but it's not necessarily hard after you get through it the first time. It's just a high reporting threshold, especially on the finance side. Unsolicited grants, which are also known in grant writing world as the dream, right? These are grants that you don't apply for, you don't ask for, they just show up either by a check or through an electronic transfer. They're usually from a foundation or charitable trust or endowment that provides funding without any kind of application. People just decide they want to give you money, they give you money. They usually originate with people who have a personal connection to an organization, like to your mission. Maybe they grew up in the parks and so now they want to give back to the parks, or maybe they lived in, they had food insecurity as a child, so now they want to contribute to a food pantry, those kind of things. If you're a school, it might be an alumni. And then it's a lot of them are from donor advised funds, which are DAFs, which are usually managed by large financial entities like Charles Schwab or Fidelity. Like you'll get a check from Fidelity Charitable and it'll have a letter saying, this is the Betsy Whaley Fund has designated you to receive this gift. If they have a DAF, there is a minimum they are required to give every year based on the value of their DAF. So it varies from year to year. It changed a little bit with inflation. Who knows what it's going to be next year, but they're required to give it away in order to maintain the tax benefits of that fund. However, there are many community foundations that manage DAFs. In Eastern Kentucky, the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky and Bluegrass Community Foundation, they have options for people to set up DAFs within their larger foundation, and then those foundations they manage and administer the funds for them. The individual donor or family supplies the money. The foundation then distributes the money at their discretion. Some of these awards can be anonymous, a lot of them from Charles Schwab and Fidelity, because they don't want to end up on everyone's mailing list. They will send it to you anonymously. Obviously, if it's not anonymous, you can enter them in your spreadsheet or software tracking that you're using as a donor. But you never know who has a DAF. So I always advise people, if you have a solid group of board members or volunteers, once a year, just say, hey, does anyone have a DAF? Does anybody have a charitable giving fund that's personal? If you do, think about giving to us. We are a 501c3, or we are a school, or whatever the situation is. Because sometimes people don't think about that, but a lot of people do have these DAFs. So another question for everybody, because I'm sure you're all just riveted and not doing 14 other things because that's what nonprofit life is while you're on a virtual training. Which of the grant types do you currently receive or have you received in the past at your organization? The poll is up if you guys want to answer it. A is foundation, B is government, C is unsolicited, D is all three, E is 2 of those types, or F is I'm not sure, or none. All right, so it looks like a lot of you actually have had government grants, which should come with a mark of bravery. If at any point in your life you are job seeking, make sure that you put, and this is not a joke, that you have worked on government grants or with government grants on your resume. It's a highly desired skill in nonprofit, and it's something that is hard to find. We had a lot of people who had all 3 types, and we had a few people who had 2 types, and then we had all people who aren't sure, which is totally fine. The average person who volunteers or works on a nonprofit would not be able to tell you the difference between these 3, and that's fine. Nobody said just foundation or just unsolicited. So proposal writing preparation. So you find an opportunity, whether it's government, whether it's foundation, Usually someone sends it to you, or you're on the mailing list for grants.gov or your local state government to get information, and you're, on its face, you're like, oh, this sounds like something I really be aligned with, or the person that sent it to you says, I think this sounds like something you'd be aligned with. So you have it, you're reading through it, and here's some things to think over. If possible, always have at least one other person read the eligibility materials or requirements. There have been times where I am all, geeked up to do a grant, and I'm all excited about it and I'm ready to go. And then all of a sudden, last minute, it on the second to the last page, it says you have to be above this threshold of annual operating budget, or below this threshold, or you have to serve X amount of people per year. And that automatically on its face means that the organization's not eligible for it. So read through it, have somebody else read through it, especially government ones. They are very dense, they are long, but you really do need to read through all of it to make sure that you are eligible for applying, because you do not want to spend all the time and effort to do an application, particularly for a government grant, and then be told you just aren't eligible for this, because that is very frustrating. So read all the information about your eligibility guidelines, the focus areas, deadlines, and reporting requirements. Again, reporting requirements could be enough of a reason not to apply for a grant. If you are an organization that has one paid staff member and you're writing for a multi-million-dollar grant and you're the person doing the reporting, you really have to think about how much time that's going to take away from what other things that you're doing. You can also contract with people to do your reporting if you want to, and that's a lot of people do that after they get the awards. And you can even, in most cases, build that into your budget to pay someone to help with the reporting and management of the grant. You should always have a broad list of what projects or initiatives need funding. I didn't finish the sentence for some reason, but to make it easier to kind of match them up. So normally what I advise organizations to do is in the fall or late summer, when you're doing your budget for the next year, make a list of what projects or needs need to be funded. Obviously everything needs to be funded, but is it, okay, we need to buy a new van for this program. Do we need to pay for staff to go out to the portable libraries and fill up the library? What are we trying to fund? Usually this list should be no more than like 4 or 5 things. Some things should be direct costs. We're going to purchase this because some funders really prefer, I want to know what my money paid for. I want to know, beginning, middle, end, that you purchased it, and here's what happened because of it. Some of them are going to be staff costs, admin costs. If you have a facility that you pay rent or mortgage on, those kind of costs. So trying to figure out what your broad list of projects are that need to be funded. I also say projects throughout this presentation, but projects could also be programs, that are ongoing. It could be an initiative that has a very time limited. This is, 2023, we're going to focus on reducing diabetes or whatever the situation is. So those are all kind of things that you can think of, but especially as we're now getting rapidly into budget season for 2023, start thinking about how you want to group the things that you need funded together to make it easier for you to pull out that list and say, here's my opportunity, here's my list. Does anything overlap? Could it overlap? And let's look at that. Discuss the opportunity of other people on your team. If you don't have other people on your team, get with another nonprofit. Get with somebody that you trust that works with this and just kind of talk through it with them. Do you meet the eligibility requirements? Do you fit the funding priorities? Do your current programs or offerings with the opportunity? If you were not planning to create a new project or program, don't create one to just get grant money, because then you are now launching a new program that you weren't planning for and didn't budget for with money that is not guaranteed. Do you need a partner? If you need a partner, who might that partner be? The other thing that sometimes happens is you'll read an opportunity and say, look, this is too big for me to do, but I think so-and-so could do it. I wonder if they know about it. I could be a partner with them. So you're no longer the lead agency, you become the partner. But that's where in nonprofit, a lot of times we get very stuck in like resource guarding. Like we all think we have this honey pot of money that is, that has to be guarded at all costs. That's not a real thing. You're much better to collaborate and partner with people, especially people who may have more admin resources than you do, then assuming they also haven't seen this government grant solicitation, or they haven't seen your local foundation's newsletter that has all the lists in it. So really, the resource guarding part for at least grants is not necessarily a reasonable thing. Can you produce a quality deadline produce a quality proposal before the deadline. Sometimes you find out about a grant 2 days before it's due. And if the format is such that you already have a proposal from the last grant you did and you can update some things and send it in, you might make that deadline. If it is a large grant proposal, or you don't have anything written already, that may not be something you can apply for. What you can do is put it on a calendar, make sure you get it the next time it comes up and be available. But I had this happen before. I had literally had someone email me and say, we want to apply for a federal grant through the Office of Violence Against Women. There was 3 days until the deadline. And I said, we're not gonna be able to do this because you can't gather all the material that we need even in 3 days. You know, all of the audits and all of the financial information and all of the assurances and all of the, getting an MOU signed takes that long. And we just couldn't apply for it. And they were really upset. And then the next year we had, you know, a month and a half lead time and they got that grant. But that year there was no way we could do it. 3 days is not long enough to do it, to even get all the things together. Can you meet the reporting requirements? Again, with government grants, the reporting requirements are very strict. Sometimes also, for instance, a lot of nonprofits have elected not to pursue United Way funding anymore because United Way's reporting requirements have gotten so strict and so detailed that a lot of organizations just can't, especially smaller organizations, cannot maintain that level of record keeping and have no reason to other than the United Way grant that they have. So it's become a real problem with United Way specifically, which they are working on from what I understand, but that's been the last 3 years. They're people who have been United Way organizations for many years have started to decline those grants because they fill in the gaps other places. Do you have the capacity to meet the financial obligations? Some grants require a match. So you are going to apply for $10,000, but you have to supply 2,000 of this. You have to match 2,000 on your own. So your whole project budget's 12,000, right? How do you have that match money? Do you have it in your, just your general fund? Do you have it because you have in kind? Do you have it by paying your electric bill? Do you have, how are you paying that? Are you just paying staff through another grant? Usually with government grants, you can't match it with another government grant, but you can match it with like a private grant or a foundation grant. So thinking about that. Also, do you have the ability to do the accounting pieces, to do the financial reporting pieces if it's required? Who else has this grantor funded recently? So here's a little hint. You can look at their 990 because they have to file at the end of every year and see who they funded before. If they are funding people at a much higher or much lower level than you need, that are in different parts of the country than you are and do not have similar missions, it may not be a good fit for you. Even if you're eligible, it may not be a good fit if you have limited time to decide what you're going to apply for, limited resources to decide how you're going to apply for things. It may not be a good fit. And that's just something that you kind of have to feel through as you look at it. But 990s are a treasure trove of information, even if you're researching a funder, and people a lot of times overlook them, but they're so valuable and they're almost on every website. Or you can Google them. They're required to be public information. So you can always find them. Brainstorming. What needs are most urgent? So even if this year you get your really solid list of 3 to 5 things that you want to fund next year, that you want to use for grant funding next year, and then all of a sudden, the vein you used to deliver food breaks down. And now you have to scramble to try to fill that need. What's most urgent? What thing is most underfunded in your organization or is going to have to be reduced or cut off if we don't find funding for it? Which project best fits within the priorities of the funder? Every funder, government, private, otherwise, will have a list of focus areas or priorities. How do your projects fit in those priorities or focus areas? How do you connect this project with your larger mission? So what is your mission? Does that align with the funder's mission and the funder's priority or the intended purpose of that money? How can you connect those things? Do you already have a template for this need from a previous application? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but reusing proposals is totally fine. It is unlikely you're going to get funded for everything you write. If you do, God bless you. But you're going to be writing a lot of times for the same kind of, and also the delay, right? Like when you apply, it can be months. A lot of federal grants that I've written are due in March and you don't find out until August or September. And they start in October if you've gotten that money. So in the meantime, you're writing grants to try to get enough funding to fund these needs. Select the project or initiative that you think is a good match for the funding opportunity. Create a task list with deadlines and people responsible for each part of the application. If you are an army of one and you're the only person writing and you are the only person who is responsible for this, I still highly recommend a task list. We need, here's all the most proposals are broken out, or they'll give you a checklist. Government grants give you a checklist of what you need to have to submit. Write that out. When do I need this done, this done, this done? Even if you're the only person writing it. It holds you accountable, because it's very easy to get very busy doing a million different things and not realize you're only a week out from this deadline. And even a week for a government grant would be hard, especially if you're going to have to gather information from other people, letters of support from partners. If you need to type up a memorandum of understanding that's signed by partners, anything that's going to be external, or maybe you have to get with your accounting firm to get your most recent audited financials. If you're going to have to ask for anything from anybody, you need to make sure that's on your list as well, so you have time to pad in for that. Submission, I always say, submissions are tricky because there are, for me, as Betsy can attest, I'm a very type A person. So I'm like, need to get this in the minute I can get it in. That's not a good strategy with grants, especially foundation grants. If they look at their grants every quarter and I send my grant in February 1st to be reviewed in April, it's just sitting around till April. It's not going to get looked at by anybody. And sometimes it gets lost, especially if it's a family foundation where you've had to mail it in. Sometimes it gets put to the bottom of the pile. So usually I advise to try to submit it about a week before the deadline. Government grants, they recommend that you try to submit no later than 72 hours before the deadline, because their system is something else, federal grants. But so think about that. So their deadline isn't necessarily your deadline. Sometimes it will be, because things happen and life happens, and I get all of that. Or you can't get a piece of information from a partner that you need, or you're waiting to find out, how much this is going to cost to fix or repair or buy. But I always say, kind of just like a good general rule, is try to shoot for a week ahead of the stated deadline for when all of your stuff is done and ready to go. Schedule time to meet with others working on the application or who will be impacted by a potential award, to sync up all those priorities, questions, and goals. When I have written grants before, the grant award comes through, and then the staff that is paid for by this grant says, hey, we don't do the stuff you said we did in your grant application. I have no idea who told you we did this. Are we supposed to be doing this? And then it becomes a problem after the fact, and you're scrambling to catch up. So having those conversations ahead of time, having those conversations about, hey, here's what we want to write for, and here are the goals that we have. Does anybody have any questions? Does this sound okay? Are these achievable things that we want to do? Has anything changed? Even if it's just an email thread that's quick, even if it's a Zoom call that's quick, even if it's 5 minutes after your monthly board meeting, it's quick. Just kind of make sure everyone's on the same page. Again, if you get really solid lists of, Betsy seconded my task list. And also it is it's very easy to get so excited about the prospect of getting something funded that you lose sight of what your priorities are, right? Once you get your really solid list of what you're trying to fund and start building proposals around that, the time it takes to check in with people is going to be less and less, because everyone's kind of already on the same page. Gather your necessary items. So everyone gets all hopped up on the grant writing piece, which obviously is incredibly important and obviously is the bulk of what we're talking about. But there are also pieces that are not going to be things that you author that you're going to need for almost all grant applications, particularly large foundation grants and government grants. If you can gather those, and a lot of them are digital, I just have them gathered in a folder on my desktop. I'm just going to pull them out when I need them. But some pieces may require time, because you're going to have to ask somebody for them, or you don't have them, you have to track them down. For instance, the IRS determination letter, or the 501c3 letter, if that's what you're familiar with. If you don't have this on hand or can't find it, you have to request a new one from the IRS. That can take 3 weeks. So if you don't have one now, I would advise getting one now. You can go online and request a new one. Your annual organization budget, your list of board members and affiliations. By affiliations, they pretty much just want to know where your board members either work or are on the board of another agency, in case there are any conflicts of interest. You don't have to talk about what church they go to or anything of that magnitude, or other social organizations they belong to, like the VFW or something like that. They really just want to know where they worked, where they retired from, or if they serve on the board of any other organizations. Key staff names and titles. This might need to, depending on what your staff and volunteer situation is and who's filling what roles, this might change frequently. There may be a large turnover. Audited financial statements. Sometimes it's just the most recent, sometimes it's the last 3 years. It just really depends. Your 990, which shows who donated and how much they gave. Annual report and program and product budget. Sometimes that is separate from the actual proposal, sometimes it's not. It just depends. But these are things that you can collect now and just have in a folder ready to go when you're ready to apply. So you're not running around chasing these things down. It's also good, even if you're just now starting with grant writing, to make sure you have all of these things. So you have them now, instead of when you're 24 hours before a grant is due and you're trying to figure out where your IRS termination letter is. So something to think about. And this is something that I stress in all of these presentations and the multi-day trainings that I do. Not every grant opportunity is going to be a good fit for your organization. And that's so, so, so crucial. One of the things you learn in nonprofit very quickly is learn scarcity. There's not enough to go around. There's not enough, there's not enough money, there's not enough opportunity, there's not enough time, there's not enough resources. In terms of grants, that is, again, not necessarily true. There is a lot of grant funding available, and but it can be very tempting to be like, I need to get this funded. We have to keep the doors on, open, we have to keep the lights on, to find a funding opportunity that is not a good fit. Or you have that gut feeling where it's not a good fit. You may also be tempted to partner with an organization with whom you are not entirely comfortable because you want an opportunity to receive grant funding where they are the lead agency. And they said, hey, can you do this? I have worked with organizations who have done that before, and it has gone extremely wrong on a lot of levels. Sometimes it's just like a personal level of interaction of ruining that kind of professional relationship. And sometimes it's even gotten into like IRS involved situations where things have gone really badly. So think about that. I really, if you're doing 14 other things right now and you listen to nothing else I say on this training, please listen to this. Resist the temptation if it does not feel right. If you are having to, what we call chase money, you are stretching your mission, you are stretching your programs, you are inventing new programs and projects to fit this, do not do it. There are other opportunities. There are other foundations. There are other grant opportunities. There are other local opportunities. There are other sponsorships that might pay for that. The ramifications of doing that is so much work, so much damage to your reputation and your passion. Nothing will wear you down faster than having to slog through records with the IRS. And that is not a joke. I know it sounds funny, but it's not a joke. It's awful. Don't lose sight of your mission or your work or what you're trying to do to chase money. If something's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. If someone offers you a partnership role and you're not comfortable with them or whatever the project is, you can politely decline it and it's fine. With grants, that learned scarcity that we all chase is very real, and we feel it very intently, and we feel a lot of responsibility for keeping things up and running. But do not do that as by sacrificing your mission or sacrificing your limited time and resources to then scramble to keep up with a grant that was never a good fit to begin with. Betsy worked with me. You see, she said amen to test on some of these grants that we should have never, ever chased when we worked at the organization together, and that Betsy and I got stuck trying to sort out with on the back end. It was not fun. Not that Betsy's not fun, she's super fun, but the sorting out was not fun. So now it's time to write common proposal elements. So a quick note, funders use different kinds of application portals, software online. You go in and fill things out. A lot of them have character or word count requirements. Some funders, especially foundation funders, it's actually like a written proposal or a letter that you have to mail in the mail, which I actually applied for a grant for somebody last month, and I had to make 25 copies of a 8-page proposal, staple them together and mail it. And so it cost something like $53 or something to like make all the appropriate copies and and mail something that heavy, which is basically a ream of paper at that point, which was crazy. But So we're going to talk about the most common section of written and online applications. The sections may not always be in the order or titled the exact same way. These are very common, so most of them are going to catch this, but they're not always in the same order. Sometimes people want to know your budget up front and your goals later, your goals up front, and they never ask you about the budget. They just want to know how much money you want. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is a general overview, and it's going to kind of help you understand what the different parts are and what those parts are designed to achieve. But if the wording is a little bit different on a proposal that you have, that could easily happen as well. A lot of times online portals are not narrative based. It's literally just boxes where you respond. Whereas a government grant would want a 20-page narrative. So it's a little bit different for that kind of proposals as well. So your proposal summary, almost all grants at some point will ask for a proposal summary or synopsis. So this is really where you just get down to brass tacks. Usually they're about 2 paragraphs long and less than 500 words. Occasionally, especially on state and federal grants, you get a whole page, which is really just half a page because it's double space, but yay. And you are going to review. So when you write this, I need you to think about this person's not going to read anything past this. So if this is my chance to get them to read the rest of my proposal, this is where it is. This is what's happening. So who you are, what is needed, why is it needed, how much will it cost, what will it accomplish? You don't have to get into the research of why this is a problem. You don't have to get into your past accomplishments. You don't have to get into why it's a problem or all the people that you work with. You don't have to do that in this part. You literally are just answering these questions. I've actually seen proposal summaries that will have these headings in bold. Who are we? We are Brushy Fork. What's needed? Here's what's needed. You know, so it's really, you just read through it and you can read it. So if you can kind of get in the idea of, I'm writing this as if someone is only going to see this part of my proposal, it makes it a little bit easier. The other thing that's tricky is usually this is the first chronological part of any proposal, but it is much easier to write it up last because you're going to have all this information already in the rest of your proposal as we're going to go through. So I always write my summary or synopsis last because sometimes goals change, objectives change, wording changes, project name changes as you're writing through all of these things, and you don't have to write it twice. You don't have to write it a bunch of different times. So you are just going through this and write it last, but usually it's first. Also, on most online applications, even if it's not all of them, it's none of them, you can save it and go to different parts of the application. You don't have to do it in the order that they present to you on the screen, which makes things a little bit easier. Organization's mission, history, and purpose. So this should establish your credibility. Why are you the person to do this work? Did you just start yesterday and you have no experience, but you watched a documentary on, you know, building canoes, and so now you're into it, or what's the situation? So what's your credibility? So as you have a clear declaration of your organization's mission statement, and if your organization has formal values and vision, you should include that as well. Not all organizations have a formalized value and vision statement or list, but if you do, you should include that. You should also include your agency's history, briefly. The year founded, important benchmarks, expertise, quotes from user and community support. So if you have you know, a really moving quote from somebody, jot it down so you remember it. Type it in your phone so you remember it to use it later. You don't have to attribute it to them if it's a confidentiality issue, but you can do all of that kind of you know, just capturing that. Particularly for local government grants and foundation grants, having quotes from people who have benefited from your past efforts is really the holy grail. I mean, they really respond, funders really respond to that because it connects it to a human thing. It's no longer, we are just trying to get healthy lunches for kids during the summertime. It is an 8-year-old explaining, I didn't eat all weekend because this program wasn't available on Saturdays and Sundays. That changes the dynamic of how the person reading accepts your information. Once you have this section completed, you should be able to use it for multiple applications, which is fantastic. That information rarely changes. It only needs occasional updates. Unless you're doing a rebranding of your organization, you're changing your mission statement, and you're drastically changing what you're doing and how you're focused, you don't have to update this very often. So it's kind of a one and done, which is always fantastic. Statement of need. Sometimes this is called the description of problem or problem statement, need statement, those kind of things. So this section describes just very succinctly why you need what you are requesting, what will happen if it's not available, relevant statistics, history, research, and how your product addresses that problem. So why do you need to do this? Why do you need this program? Why does your organization, why does community, why do individuals need this program? What's going to happen if it's not available? So this is, there's two kinds of prongs. It's either you have an ongoing project that has been there for a while and it's instituted, and if it stops, what will happen? Or how is this problem going to be worsened if your new project or initiative is not introduced to help mediate the problem? Relevant history and statistics, it depends on what you're writing for. And your successful section will contain 5 elements. Current situation. Current situation is we do not have enough water fountains in our town, and dehydration is a real issue. The significance of the problem that it creates. Dehydration makes people depressed. It gives people headaches. All those kind of things. Daniel's dehydrating right now. Factors causing or contributing to the situation. Our water fountains are in disrepair. The city has cut funding for water fountains. They did not receive maintenance during the pandemic for fear of germs and those kind of things. Who's impacted by this? People who are impacted. People who are walking and running using our green spaces. People who are currently without a home. People who are out walking their dogs. Children. Potential outcomes if it's not addressed. Potential outcomes litter, because people are going to start carrying plastic water bottles around. People aren't going to want to come to parks and nature trails and sidewalks and downtown areas where they don't have access to water. These are just examples. I don't work with the water fountain nonprofits, but this is just an example of what could happen if it's not addressed. And it doesn't have to be anything outlandish. It could literally just be, people aren't going to want to come walk in our park if they have no place to fill up their water bottles, or their kids can't get a drink after playing on the playground. And that's not good. Your project description. How are you planning to address the problem you describe? So you describe the problem and you say, this is a problem for us. It's a problem for our community. It's a problem for people in general. It's a problem for humanity, whatever scope you're working on. And here's how we are going to fix this. Here's how we are going to mitigate it. Here's how we are going to end it if that's possible. Here's how we are going to change things related to this problem. So you need a clear project name. You should always have a project name. Don't just say it's the new van project. No, it has to be like, moving food project. It has to have some kind of name they're going to remember. Identification of a focus audience. Your focus audience could be a group of individuals or people, or it could be a geographic location, or it could be a city, or it could be a civic park. The audience is the people or place where this is going to happen and who it's going to impact. A description of specific activities related to addressing this problem, including brief examples. If you've worked on this problem before, if you have a current project that addresses that problem, give a brief overview of that. We're expanding on the success of our first band project, and now we are doing a second band project because we've had a reported increase in need. I mean, it can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be, a large narrative about all of that kind of stuff. How this project directly impacts the need you described. So if I said, we need more water fountains, how is this project going to get more water fountains into this town? How's that going to happen? Well, I'm asking you to help us pay for time, materials, and staff to build 10 more water fountains in our town. Thus, increasing the number of water fountains and decreasing those negative outcomes we talked about in our problem statement. A timeline for the project. So timeline, sometimes funders, especially in government grants, will ask for a specific, detailed timeline. Month 1, you're doing this. Month 2, you're doing this. Month 3, you're doing this. And sometimes the deliverables are part of that timeline. Most foundation grants, it's much more of within the first 3 months, we're doing this. Within the first 6 months, we're doing this. If you're writing a grant for like a purchase, like you're trying to purchase a playground equipment, the playground equipment will be purchased within the first 60 days and will be installed in the first 90 days. That's all you have to say. It doesn't have to be research and all those kind of things. It can just be, here's what's going to happen. How does this project or program fit within the funder's priorities? We talked about this. We're not chasing money. We're not stretching what their priorities are or our priorities are to meet each other. So you simply say, given this solicitation's focus on children, we feel that a new playground fits with this priority area. Just really connecting it for the reader. Really just very simply stating what they're looking for and what you're looking for connect. How you are uniquely qualified to deliver the project or program successfully. Meaning, if there are other organizations in your area that do similar work, not that they are good or bad or indifferent, doesn't matter. How are you uniquely qualified to do it? What makes your organization? Is it the length of time you've been there, the success you have, the fact that you are brand new and you are introducing a brand new process or a brand new idea or a brand new approach to this problem? How are you uniquely qualified? By you, I mean your organization. Sometimes your organization is just you, depending on what your situation is, and I get that. But we're talking about what makes you or your organization the person to help mitigate this problem to benefit the community or to benefit people. Little side tip, this is the heart and soul of your proposal. This is where you get to sell your project, program, or initiative. You should spend the bulk of your time writing this section. It's very important. It's not always the longest part, but it is a very important part because they're going to, especially if it's a grant that has a very narrow focus, like a government grant that's focused all on planting trees. The problem statement is going to be pretty much the same for everybody, right? There aren't enough trees. We want to plant trees. There's going to be some different research based on their location, but the project description of how your idea might be different from everyone else's and how you're going to promote, increase, add to the number of trees. That's what this is. This is you. This is you selling your program, project, or initiative, and it's really important that you have that idea. You know who you're trying to help, where you're trying to help, that you have qualifications to deliver this and deliver it well. Describing impact. So this is the thing that people, especially if they are not full-time grant writers or they're not really experienced with grants, really struggle with. So you talk about how your project will benefit the focus audience or area, the funder's mission, and your mission. Sometimes this part is included in the project description, depending on how the funder words it. Sometimes it's a separate section. So just be aware of that. But you have kind of three things here. You have a goal, what we are trying to achieve generally by addressing the problem described. Generally. You don't have to have numbers, figures, facts, times, anything like that. What you're trying to do with this problem, what you're trying to do with this project. Objectives. How are you going to observe progress toward that goal? This is where you might have a percent, like an increase, a decrease, percentage, how you're going to measure it, that kind of thing. And we're going to get more specific on this in a second. So don't panic just reading this. Deliverables, these are quantifiable things. We're going to buy 2 new vans. We're going to add 2 new staff members. We're going to buy 40 Facebook ads. These are things that are quantifiable, that are, in and out. You can show you did it, yes or no questions. So I'm sure some of you, especially if you've been working in grants for a while, have seen this. It's one of those things that's kind of ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It is useful to a point, but this is just something, they call them SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, they're time bound. It's great to have goals and new things and things you're trying to think of and think big, but when you are writing for a grant, you can think big, you have to take small bites of it. They always say, like, how do you eat a plane 1 bite at a time? That's one of the things that you have to think about here. Can you do this? What's reasonable? If you remain a one-person volunteer-led organization, is this really a reasonable goal, and how will you achieve the goal? So let's talk about goals. How many goals do you need? So one of the things that I do is I am a grant reviewer for the federal government. I actually read and score grants based on their scoring metrics. I also do that for a couple different foundations. I score their applications. And sometimes organizations get really, they think it's going to look more impactful if they have like 5 goals listed. For reviewers, that just kind of tells reviewers that you don't really know what you want to do or how to do it. It's not more impressive to have 4 or 5 goals. It's really not. It makes the reviewer wonder, is this product too big? Is it too broad? Is it going to get lost in the details? So it's really rare to need more than 1 or 2 goals for a project. If you are a healthcare provider or writing for like a research grant, you may have more than 2 goals. But I don't believe anybody on here, except for maybe the education folks, would have any need for that. So what exactly is a goal? It's the big thing you're trying to accomplish. It's about the ultimate impact or what you're hoping to bring about. Again, you're trying to, and it relates to your mission. So our goal is to decrease dehydration in Indianapolis by offering better options for obtaining drinking water. It doesn't say, again, time, date, increase, percentage numbers or anything. It's just what I'm trying to do overall. How do you make it stand out? Use what they call visionary terms, which are deliver, develop, establish, expand, something that makes you think of something like moving, something big, something action oriented. Improve, produce, provide, reduce. People always kind of stay away from reduce because they don't think it's a good action word because it has kind of a negative connotation. But if you're trying to reduce the amount of cars in your town to reduce pollution, reduce is absolutely what you should use. It's still an action word. It's not a negative word. So I'm going to give you an example of a entirely fake nonprofit. If it's a resemblance to any nonprofit you've heard of, it's completely coincidence. I don't know. I Googled this. There's not a nonprofit by this name. So this nonprofit organization is dedicated to maintaining, improving, and creating outdoor dining areas in local parks. They're really focused on making accessible and safe and inclusive places, and also promoting outdoor activities as a community building activity, as family building activity. Here are some of their tables. For those who don't know, that middle table there is actually a really clever design. It is designed for the lower bench to be for like toddler, small children, the middle bench to be for adults, and that kind of hole in the middle that you see is actually a built-in like high chair. And then the end on the left is open for people who might be in a wheelchair, might be using a wheelchair. So it's a really cool design. I actually was in a park that had one of those, and it was really interesting to see. But I digress. It's not really the point here. So based on this information that you have, you kind of know what they're doing. Which one of these would be an example of a goal statement for that organization? We will build 15 new outdoor tables in the next 12 months. We will promote the safety, accessibility, and use of our local outdoor dining areas as a community building tool. In addition to adding to the total number of outdoor tables, we will increase the number of child-safe options, or none of our outdoor tables are handicap accessible, and we receive frequent feedback on this issue. So think about what we just talked about, and that the goal is your overarching goal here. What do you guys think? I can't see your answers, so if you just want to guess, that's fine. I can see your total answers. I just can't see individual answers, so. We'll give you guys just a couple more seconds. And you can move the poll box off of the slide if it's you can move it to one side or the other to read the options again if you need to. All right, so the best example of a goal statement here is B. Our project is designed to promote the safety, accessibility, and usage of our local outdoor dining areas. A is either an objective or a deliverable, depending on what your project is. C could be a goal, except for it's kind of mushed together, right? Like we're going to increase outdoor tables and the child safe option. It'd be better if it was worded into two separate goals, or if that was an objective of the larger goal. And the last one is more of a comment. That's not really talking about what you're trying to do or how you're doing it. So does that kind of make sense? It's one of these things that everyone gets in their head about what's a goal, what's an objective, what's an outcome. The goal is B, which is just the overall what we're trying to accomplish here, what this project is trying to accomplish. It uses the word promote. It describes what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. We are promoting something, safety, accessibility, and usage of what? Our local dining areas. Why? Community building tool. It's not, once we get so caught up in it, and I'm guilty of this even now, getting in my head about, is this a goal statement, is this an objective statement? It's kind of backing up and looking at what you're looking at.
Hey, Jenny, can we stop just for a minute and see if people have questions or comments about any of that? Because I think this area of the goal statements is often where people really struggle a little bit.
Anybody have any questions? Okay. If you guys think of any, again, please put them in the chat, or just come off mute or raise your hand, your little digital hand, and we will talk to you. No pressure. Objectives. So objectives are also sometimes called outcomes. They used to only be kind of only objectives or only outcomes. Now you kind of see both. I expect in the end, outcomes will win for the title, but right now it's kind of still both. There are two types of objectives. So the first is a process. This describes a task, again, something that has a start and end. We are going to hold 3 webinars between these 2 dates. That's an objective. Impact. Impact a lot of times is used for ongoing projects, or when the impact is going to be more abstract. So you're trying to increase literacy or decrease depression or improve access to resources, something like that. Something that's a little more intangible, something that's a little more not, we're counting 1, 2, 3, and 4. Quality objectives describe what are you going to do to accomplish your goal. So you have your goal statement. Your goal statement's fantastic. You're ready to go on your goal statement. What are 3 to 5 things you need to do to go to that goal statement, right? Be stated in action terms. We're going to increase or decrease knowledge, anxiety, usage, collaboration, increase collaboration, decrease drug usage, or whatever. Define the population to be served. We are going to increase collaboration among technical colleges in Eastern Kentucky by 30%. Be measurable and include a basic time frame. So for objectives, usually the time frame is very like within the first 3 months, within the last, within the final quarter of this grant cycle. It's not as exact as like a timeline. It's just kind of, to give that person an idea of what comes, especially if it's going to be an overall process. We have to purchase the van, and then we have to promote the van, and then we have to, start using the van in the community. If it's going to be a process that takes time, one has to come before the other. That's how your objectives should be listed in order that they're going to happen. One of the things with objectives that are, that get a little tricky is, and we'll talk about this in the next one, is objectives versus deliverables. So if one of your objectives, especially if your project is very focused on what's like a transactional nature, we are going to purchase water fountains. We are going to purchase books for the library. We are going to buy a bench for in front of our student union. You may not have any impact objectives. You may just have, by, within the first 3 months, we will purchase a bench for students to sit on at the bus stop in front of our student union. And you're not going to have a deliverable, because the deliverable is that's what it is. The bench is the deliverable. If you're writing for a project or program that, again, is more abstract or lengthy, that doesn't have kind of a beginning or an end, that involves staff, if it involves staff, you're almost always going to have an impact, because your process, objective for staff would be what? We have people who show up to work. Like, that's not a process, right? The impact is we are going to hire 2 new case managers to increase the number of people who can access our services within year 1 of the grant. That's an impact. So you're always going to have goals. You're always going to have objectives. You might not always have deliverables for each objective. It just depends on what the objective is. Process objectives typically will not have outputs and deliverables because they are then in and of themselves a start and end purchase or event that is just kind of a one-time thing. Anything that involves staff or an education campaign or a collaborative or a task force is probably going to be more of an impact objectives, which may have deliverables under them. So deliverables are also called outputs. Deliverables are almost entirely the word that is used now, but occasionally you will still see outputs. Sometimes deliverables are also called activities, and sometimes they're included in the timeline. Sometimes, I mean, it's all over the place. No one can really decide what they want to do with this. When I first started writing grants, we had goals and outputs. That was it. What's your goal? And give me the numbers and figures and dates that you're going to do these things. And now it's a little more in depth, because one of the things they figured out is it's hard to capture or count or quantify increases or decreases in knowledge, increases or decreases in feelings, increase or decrease or expansion of resources. So the impact became a bigger issue than the number of clients or the number of staff people who were funded. Oh, thanks, Connie. You have access to my PowerPoint, so hopefully you're able to read through the rest of it. Many funders don't require this anymore. Some do, many don't. And most government grants now, they are called activities as opposed to deliverables. That's how they're worded in solicitation. And some funders request details on items produced. And again, these are usually hard items that you can count. These a lot of times include purchase of equipment, completion of capital projects, excuse me. So if you got a grant to redo your lobby, you would say, we will get, the objective would be within this grant cycle, we will complete the renovation of our lobby at the student union. Then the deliverable is, within the first 30 days, we will collect 3 bids on the lobby renovation. By first quarter, we will have a contractor selected. So they're time specific and they are things that you can just check off. Think of deliverables as a checklist, things that you could check off. You can't check off increasing or decreasing knowledge, increasing or decreasing usage. You can check off when we got our quotes. You can check off that we selected a contractor. You can check off that we have ordered the materials. So think of deliverables as things if you had a list that you could just check off as yes or no being done. Binary, yes or no. Marketing or PR items. If you're going to purchase, $300 worth of Facebook ads to promote your event, that's a yes or no thing. It's purchased, it's paid for, it's done. That was in the first, that was by January 3rd or whatever date you picked. Hosting training events. If you have said we are going to host 5 training events, that's something you can count. At this time, in the first half of next year, we will host 3 training events. In the second half, we will host 2. Number of surveys completed. Again, this is a very binary thing. I can count the number of surveys completed. If I told the grantor I was going to have 300 surveys, I need to present how I'm going to get there. Every quarter, we plan to collect 100 surveys that will be completed. Those kind of things. So deliverables are not, I feel, as nebulous as goals and objectives are, because goals and objectives a lot of times are talking about larger issues and measuring things by looking at all the indications that lead into those. So if you're trying to, if your goal is to increase awareness of resources for literacy in my community, and one of your objectives is to hold a series of community forums at the local library, encouraging people of all ages to read. And then your deliverable is we will hold 5 of these community forums in the first 6 months. That's kind of the three threads. big, medium, and large. I think some of you like rubbing your temples already, and I'm really sorry. This is really the hard part of grant writing. It's it can be very tricky, and it can be very overwhelming. But one of the things I can tell you is just don't get in your head about it. The other thing is that by and large, if they like your project and these are a little bit off, they'll come back to you and say, can you rework this part? This seems like more of an objective. That actually happened to me on a federal grant when I very first started writing grants. They really liked our project and they came back and said, we're going to fund your project, but we need you to rework the goal section. We feel like what you put at that time, it was an outcome. An outcome is actually more of a deliverable. And so we were able to rework it. So this part, don't get so in your head about it. Just once you start doing it and getting feedback on it, you will get a better feel for it. And if your project description is really strong, this part will kind of feed itself. I really don't want people, and this is what trips people up when I get questions about grants that people are writing. 90% of the time, it's about this kind of stuff. So really, don't feel awkward about it. If you're rubbing your temples thinking, Jenny, you're a lunatic, that's fine. This is just a hard part. It's a hard part because it's not A, B, and C. It's just a hard thing to capture. So this is a question, and which of these is an example of an objective and which is a deliverable? So I don't know how we did the poll for this, Daniel, because it's kind of a weird question. This may not have been the best way to word this question on a Zoom call, and in an in-person thing, it's a little bit different. So there is one, and you guys can put it in the chat if you want to. One of these is an objective, and one of these is a deliverable. So if you guys want to, I don't think responding to the poll is going to be useful, but you can put it in the chat if you want to, or just think on it yourself if you want to. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to read through the options.
Yeah, putting it in the chat's higher risk, right? Because you make yourself vulnerable because you might say it wrong.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not a grant expert, but I'm just going to say that I think C is a deliverable because you can check it off the list.
Yes. So yes, C, if you read it, it's a yes or no question. It has a deadline. It's a deliverable, correct? The objective, depending on what your goal is, the objective is either B or D. If you are not, if your project is not specific enough to say how many tables you're going to do or whatever, D is the objective, because we're going to increase the usage measured by this way, and it is what but it's very general, right? We're gonna increase usage of at least 4 outdoor dining areas. It doesn't say how they're going to increase the usage. It doesn't say why. It just says here's how many we're going to increase and here's how we're going to measure it. So if that's all your project was, and you're saying we need a research, we need a research team to figure out, like a research period to figure out how many tables we need or how we're going to do that, or if it's a promotion or whatever, that would be your objective. However, B could also be an objective, which is tricky because there is only one of each. I wasn't lying. B is more of a goal statement unless your project is a larger thing. Outdoor dining is going to decrease crime in our community. That's your goal, to decrease crime by encouraging community dining and family time. Then an objective would be to make that outdoor priority for people in your town. So it depends on how specific your project is. So you guys all got the deliverable. It's the easiest one once you know what it is. When someone realizes it's a binary A or check off the list, deliverables are easy. Objectives are always going to be a little squishier, but nobody picked A, which is fantastic. A is something that would probably be included in your project description. It's very important information, but it would probably be included in your project description. If your project is not going to have hard deliverables, like for instance, say you are a task force and you are convening people together, you can talk about how many meetings you're going to have, but most of your objectives are going to be impact. We are going to add 5, we are going to reach a larger and more diverse population. We're going to increase diversity among our coalition. That's an objective. Deliverable on that is we are going to seek out and invite 10 new organizations and hopefully we get 5. So again, please don't be discouraged by this, and please don't get too far in your head with it. If they like your project, most funders will help you with this part if they don't like the way you've written it. But again, make sure whatever you put in your objectives and deliverables, whether they are check off the list or whether they are we're increasing knowledge, decreasing drug usage, whatever it is, that you have a way to measure it and that you have a time limit on it. So for instance, one of the organizations I work with now, they are increasing self-sufficiency skills for young adults to be able to live on their own. It's a transitional housing program for people who are 16, 21, 22. So when we describe their objectives, we say our impact are measured by, they have two tools they use. One is a personal growth chart, people set their own goals, and one is a social emotional health survey that they give every quarter. So we describe the two tools in like 2 sentences, and then the objectives are, we will see an increase in social emotional stability as measured by our survey. I think it's 15% increase what they're looking for now. The deliverable there is 85% of clients will complete their quarterly surveys every quarter, right? So it's something like that. So it's you're just going down the list. It's not, it doesn't need to be anything anxiety provoking. Don't lose any sleep over this. Your product description is the most important part. This, I feel like the objectives, goals, deliverables is what really prevents a lot of people from trying grant writing and just jumping into it, because it seems so overwhelming and so kind of squishy, right? It's not a checklist of this is a goal, this is it, except for deliverables. And so you're already back to where you started. It's very confusing, but it's fine. If your product description is strong and the funder likes it, they will help you with this part if they think you've done it incorrectly. Just give it a shot. So I fixed the graphic there that said a picture's worth 1,000 words. I feel like a flow chart's worth 1,000 words. So deliverables support your objectives, objectives support your goals, and your goals support your mission. It's a little bit easier to think of it if you think of it as it's feeding up to the top of your towards your mission, right? Again, deliverables, check it off the list. Yes, it's done. No, it's not done with the timeline. Objective, more increase, decrease, expand, promote, reduce, those kind of things. Goals are your overall effort. We are going to improve our community by increasing the number of picnic tables that are available. So those kind of things, and those are all things that are to support your mission. So kind of keep this flow chart in mind when you're writing this kind of thing. Project evaluation. So some funders do not ask for this in the formally ask for this in the application process. Government grants usually do. Some do not. If they do not, you can also just include a short paragraph at the end of your product description, which is how you're going to evaluate if your project was successful or not. How are you going to determine that? Is it, again, is there an online reservation system you can look for increase in usage? Do you have surveys? Is it the number of clients you're going to serve? Is it the number of communities you're going to serve? If you're in a mobile library van, are you trying to expand your service area so your success is we added 2 new communities? How often is the project being monitored? We are going to have a monthly team meeting about what, how this project is going. Every quarter, we will review surveys or usage data. How are you monitoring this? Who's monitoring it, and what are their credentials to do it? If you are a small nonprofit and you only have a couple people on staff, or it's all volunteer led, this is our board chair is monitoring this, who is a retired teacher and familiar with how libraries work. What do we do with successes and lessons learned? So you talk about, we all projects should be successful, but you also talk about that you are going to review for opportunities or missed opportunities and how you are going to incorporate that into your future projects. So if you say our 5-year strategic plan includes adding 2 more mobile library vans, this project will determine the viability and success and processes for those expansions. So we will meet quarterly to discuss opportunities and difficulties. Then you incorporate it into your larger scheme of things. You talked about that you are willing to learn from struggles, learn from anything that is a roadblock or a stumbling area, and incorporate it to make your work better. Again, it may not be included, or may not be required, maybe included, but it's always important to have at least a couple of sentences on how you plan to gauge if this project was a success. Again, if you are writing for a more transactional oriented situation, then it's just going to be, yeah, we were able to purchase, 2 new vans. Thank you. That's how you know you're successful. But if you're trying to do something else, like an expansion or an increase or a decrease, or anything like that, you really need to talk about evaluation a little bit. Budget, I feel like, is the other area where people are very nervous. So if a budget is, did I skip one? So these are out of order. So I'm going to go to this one and go back to that one. So this section is going to talk about the cost, financial security, and other funders of your project. So obviously a lot of grants, whether they are foundation or government, have their own template they want you to use, which makes things a little bit easier. Sometimes they don't, and that gets even scarier for some people. But the overall things you're trying to use: the total cost of the project, the amount of the request from our funder, percentage of total cost their award would constitute. A lot of funders will say, we don't want to be the only funder on this project, so tell us how much we're going to be paying for. We need to know this is a diverse funding stream. Other committed funders to the project, if applicable. A sustainability plan is literally just how you plan to raise the remainder of the funds or sustain the program if it's ongoing. Again, if your project is purchasing something, building something that's beginning and end, and that's all the cost it's going to be, you don't need to sustain it. But if it's going to be an ongoing process or an ongoing expansion, you talk about what your current funding streams are, your pending grant applications if you have any, past funding streams that were likely to be renewed. Our local library gives us $500 a year, and we expect that to continue, like those kind of things. It doesn't have to be a long explanation. If a budget is required, it should demonstrate consistency between your budget, your projects, your methods, and your objectives. So as an example, last month, just finished up a grant review for the federal government, and we had a really, really strong narrative, right? Really great product description. And we're all, everybody in my group was like, this was so well written. We get to the budget had 4 staff members that were not mentioned anywhere in the product description or as a partner or anything. We had no idea what these 4 staff members were doing. They were just listed in there, and they were like, it was like 25% of their time. It wasn't like they were, the finance person, it was 5% of their time. It was a large piece. And then there was over half their budget was for a contractor that they never discussed anywhere in their description. So 74% of their budget were things that were not included in their product description. We had to give them a 0 for it. It's worth 15 points on that particular metric. We had to give them a 0 because we could not follow it. And it was hard to do because their product was so great, but they can't risk fraud. They can't risk, you misappropriating money. So if you say this grant is going to pay for staff to do this, that's the staff that needs to be in your budget. There's always some overhead. Like we have, our receptionist or our executive director at like 3% or 5%. But if the staff and needs that you mentioned have to be included, they have to be consistent. If you figure out by the time you get to budget, you need to add things in, go back to your product description and add it back in. But I've been doing that for 5 years. I've been scoring grants. That's the first time it's ever happened, and it was painful because this project was so good. We actually sent a note to OVW and said, maybe you go back to this particular applicant and say, can we rework this budget, because the project is really solid, but this budget just doesn't meet criteria on the metric. Make sure there's no non-allowable expenses. So a lot of solicitations, especially government, will say this grant can't pay for capital campaign or construction or campaign finance or a lot of other things that are in their research. A lot of times it's excluded unless it's a research grant. So you need to make sure that whatever you have in there is allowed to be in there. If you have a budget, if they have a budget template, use their budget template, no matter how wonky and disjointed it might be. If you're using your own template, it should be in a spreadsheet form, easy to comprehend, and show both line items and totals. You can use Excel, use Google Sheets, save it as a PDF so they can't move things around once they're looking at it. Because, you know, sometimes if you're looking at a spreadsheet, you start clicking around to like zoom in on something, it changes the number, it changes the formula, things get very wonky. So always save it as a PDF form. But both Google Sheets, which is free to use, and Microsoft Excel are really easy to use for this. If you're not sure how to use them, there's a lot of really good free tutorials on both of how to do it and how to make it look nice. Most foundation funders only require simple budgets, while most government grants require highly detailed budgets. Most of you said you had worked on government grants, so you know it's everything from like phone costs to mileage to fuel to depreciation to, you know, computer and software and all these things. It's very, very detailed, but it's, you know, they give you a template for it, so it's very easy to do, which is very detailed. So this is an example of an actual budget that I used with the Arthritis Foundation when I was there. It's shared with their permission. It's an old one. It's not currently in use. This was for foundation grants, foundations that we applied for. This was the budget that I created, and it was successful. We got this project funded after about 3 or 4. I think we submitted 6 applications to 6 foundation funders. We got 4 of them, and it got funded. And you can see that it's very straight to the point. It's very simple. It has the title, it has the rate, and then it just divides out from there. This is an example of a simple budget. This is not obviously a detailed budget. But a lot of foundation funders just kind of want to see that you have an idea of how your money is going to go and where it's going to be spent. They don't need to know the, you know, nickel dime mileage rate and whatnot that the federal government needs to know. They just want to know who's paying for what and how is it going to work. So this is an actual budget that I used, and the costs, and, you know, you have to collect all the costs from everybody. It's important. I don't know if anybody on the call, most likely not, has a federally determined indirect cost rate. If you don't, that's fine. You can just use an indirect cost. Indirect costs are things that, you know, like payroll services, or, you know, bottled water, if that's what you get for, you know, your office or whatever, or accounting, or you know, insurance for your office building, or whatever. So normally if in academic settings, they're much higher. They can be upwards of like 35%. But for non-academic settings, usually they're between 10 and 15% if you don't have a federal government rate. Most nonprofits do not decide to get a formal federal government rate because it's hard to change. Like right now, with a lot of inflation and things happening, people are trying to adjust their rates, and it just takes a long time. But most of the time, especially for foundation funders, indirect cost rates, 10 to 15%, not going to raise any alarm bells, and it gets you to cover all of those back-end administrative costs that you don't think about how to cover anywhere else. A lot of government grants allow indirect costs without having a rate, but they're capped usually at 6% of the total budget. Sometimes they're a little bit higher. But I encourage you to always include indirect costs, because these things cost you money. Software costs money. Mailing paychecks, if you do that, costs money. Electronic transfers cost money, and not a lot of money, but adding all of that up, it's really important to have it. If you have a human resources person, or you contract with a human resources person to manage like hiring and firing and posting ads and whatnot, that all gets put under direct costs. So general tips. So I saw a lot of you said that you hadn't worked with family foundations. I really encourage you to think about working with family foundations or private foundations. There's a lot of money there. The applications are shorter. The awards are usually lower. I'm not going to pretend that, but they're usually much more flexible, and they usually don't have a lot of reporting requirements. So if you haven't gotten into your foundation funding stuff, get into it, take a look, start asking around. Most do not have a website. Something like 82% of them do not have a website, because it's just like a foundation that accepts applications, and they read them and send you a check. Like, that's literally what it is. They don't promote it, they don't advertise it. So even if you Google it, you won't be able to see it. So there are paid subscription services that you can search foundations by criteria. Foundation Directory Online is by far the most detailed and comprehensive one, but it is very expensive. It's between $2,000 and $3,000 a year. However, most public libraries will let you use it for free if you have a library card. I'm a big proponent of public libraries. I love public libraries. Most universities have a membership to FDO because they get them at a discount. So if you have a volunteer or board member that works for a university that might let you get permission to let you do it, we have a couple organizations here do that with IU and Ivy Tech. But that will show you their 990s, who they've given to, what the average award is, how you apply, like literally like send them a letter, send them a proposal, send a 2-page proposal, where they've given to in the past. Oh, thanks, Charlie. Tell your folks we said hi. And so it's really important that if you can access those, you access it. It's overwhelming at first, but it's so much, I would say it is by far the best foundation locator, but it's just expensive, but there are ways around that. Grant Watch is about $99 a year. That has both local government and some foundation in it. Grant Station is, I don't know how much it is now, but TechSoup, which was sent to some people earlier, which is a discount place for technology for nonprofits, it has a lot of sales on there for $199 a year. Grant Station's mostly foundations as well. It's just not as comprehensive as the FDO. Most of you know this, I'm sure. The state government grant opportunities for Kentucky can be found at that website. Most federal grant opportunities can be found at grants.gov. CDC has their own, and the National Institute of Health has their own. But grants.gov usually incorporates theirs into it, but those are the big ones. With foundations, just start poking around. I mean, if you can get $10,000 foundation awards, do it. The competition is usually lower. There's not as many people applying for it. And there's a really good way to actually connect with people in your area and your community. A lot of businesses have grants, and people don't think about this. This is just a little list that I made of common ones. I think they all operate in Kentucky. I checked all of them. As far as I know, I took off the ones that I knew didn't. But like the Walmart grant, after you get signed into their system, you can apply to multiple Walmart stores in your area. The grant application itself literally takes 6 minutes. Like I just did 12 of them for a client the other day, and I was done in 40 minutes. And they're between $500 and $5,000 is the award. Because in each individual store gives awards. The manager decides how the awards work. So I went on Walmart's website by location, looked up everything that was in this particular client's service region. There were 12 stores, and I did 6 for the first quarter and 6 for the second quarter. And that's what I applied for. And it was simple, made a lot of sense. And most of these are that way. They're really quick applications. The Verizon Round Room one, you have to have an employee sponsor, but they're on their website. They'll have who your local representative is. You can email them and say, I'm looking for a sponsor. They'll help you find one. But a great project for a volunteer, especially if they don't want to be direct constituent or public facing, is say, can you look around who in our town, could be private corporations, it could be companies, it could be local businesses, have grant giving arms. They can, all of that's on Google. They're not hiding any of that because they want that front and center to be known that they are giving to their community. So that's something to think about. There are several clubs and organizations that have grants. Usually they're small grants, but a lot of times they go unspent because nobody knows they're there and nobody applies for them. Again, Rotary clubs, Elks, VFW, the American Legion in my hometown, from a very small town in Indiana, they give $5,000 grants every year, and usually they're begging people to apply for them because they can't find people to apply for them. So if you have any of these in your town, again, have a volunteer, or for you to just shoot an email or call somebody and say, do you do grants? Do you have grants? Do I need to talk to somebody over there? Can I come present myself? Like, what's happening? But these are things that get overlooked a lot. Because they don't have to give away money. They're not like a foundation or the government which have appropriated funds for it. They just have this money to give if they have applicants. So think about that. Think about how, there are a lot of smaller community funds, especially given the last 2 years and as the circumstances now. There are a lot. Betsy put that in there. There are small community funds that try to give grants. The other thing that people don't always think of that I always encourage people to do is send out an email or text or whatever to your board and volunteers and say, hey, do any of your work where you work, your companies, have grants or sponsorships or employee giving opportunities that you could think of for us? Or does your church? A lot of churches have charitable giving grants, but they're not a foundation, so they're not going to be online anywhere as a foundation. Usually you have to be nominated by a congregant. So just putting that in your volunteers and board's mind, thinking about, does my work have grants? Does my church have grants? Am I a Kiwanis? Can I get somebody connected over there? But a lot of times until you kind of stoke that a little bit, they don't think about it. But these are grants that are going unclaimed. And who wants that, right? Again, learn scarcity. It's not as, grant funding is not as scarce as people think. Government grant funding is a little bit different, but foundation and private grant funding is not as scarce as people think. I'm an optimist, but you have to prepare for rejection. Great. Yes, banks a lot of times have grants. So do realtors. Realtor coalitions almost always have grants they'll give out to. Most grant applications are declined entirely or awarded at a lesser amount. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with the quality of your application. It has nothing to do with any of that. Usually it's limited dollars. If you're rejected and the funder allows it, ask for feedback. Say, thank you for your time reviewing my proposal. I'd like to improve for the next round. Is there any feedback you can give me? Sometimes they give to you, sometimes they don't. Government grants have to give you their scoring metrics and comments. So if they don't, they're required to, if they are state or federal funding. It's especially true the first time you apply to a new potential funder. And on average, it takes 3 to 5 times of applying to the same funder to get funded. So it's a lot. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but it's also a sprint because you have deadlines. So it's the worst of both worlds in a lot of ways. But just think about that. Don't get too down. You know, I'm again very type A. So when I get a rejection letter, especially when I started, it was like, you know, the end of the world. But Betsy helped me realize the world doesn't revolve around me and that it wasn't anything to do with my personal self-worth. But I appreciate that. Gratitude and engagement. Send a thank you note, whether they gave you money or didn't give you money. Thank you for your time. Thank you for helping our community. Obviously, for government grants, this doesn't really apply because you can't thank the federal government so easily. It's an investment in your future. Set up a Google alert so you can learn about what they're doing. The only time they hear from you shouldn't be when you're asking for money, unless that's one of their rules, which they will tell you very quickly. If you're awarded funds, thank them publicly on your Facebook or Instagram or newsletter or whatever you have. So again, for everybody who's hung in this long and has been doing 14 different things and answering phone calls, this is the 2 things I want you to take away. I don't know why it renumbered to 1 and 1, but it's 2 things. First, every person who writes grants reuses grant proposals. They cut and paste, they copy and paste. Anyone who tells you they don't is probably lying to you. It's totally fine. Once you have a solid proposal for a certain project, you should reuse it. If it gets funded by a funder and they gave you high marks on it, reuse it. You may have to rework parts of it. You may have to do all of that. But that's something that you have to really think about and read through to make sure it still makes sense. Because if you're cutting and copying different parts, it could get kind of disjointed. So you have to read through it before you submit it. The question we have from Shauna is, how much time and effort should we spend creating a new proposal template each year? Do foundations remember proposals from one year to the next? So you don't want to send the exact same proposal to the same funder year after year after year. So what I usually do is after the budget's finalized, again in like August or September, and the list of what we're trying to fund comes out, that 4th quarter, because there are very few grants that are due in 4th quarter. Everybody does it in the first 3 quarters. They front load the year. Write your proposals for the following year in the 4th quarter. And then you have them for next year. To be honest, by and large, most grants don't remember from one year to the next exactly what you wrote. But you need to be showing, make sure everything that's updated, the years are updated, that your goals might be a little bit updated, a little bit different. If you found out new information or new statistics, use that. But really for 3 to 5 proposals, again, if we're not talking about huge government grants, if you're just trying to get the nuts and bolts and goals and things done for them, you can write proposals for them in the 4th quarter of this year. It doesn't have to be a thing that you slave away at for hours. You can, if you have quality proposals from last year, you figure out how to use them and put them in the new proposals for this year. The biggest thing is to make sure that they are high quality and they are current. Because a lot of times when you get into a deadline, you start, cutting and pasting, frantically putting things in, you kind of will contradict yourself in the whole thing. The second one, and this is the big one, I want you all to remember this, write it on your arm in Sharpie. You learn how to write grants by writing grants. I started writing grants, and this is a true story. Betsy sent me the wrong meeting invitation. So I showed up at this wrong meeting at work, and they were talking about writing a grant. And we, at that time, we didn't have a grant writer on staff. And Betsy and Pam, who was our grant administrator at the time, said, "Hey, Jenny, why don't you give this a shot and try to write it?" That's literally how I started writing grants 12 years ago. And I think now it's like 17 million or something is how much I brought into different organizations. My first grant is probably garbage if I read it now, but that's how you learn to write it, right? You're not losing money if you don't get a grant. You're losing money if you don't try. That's the big thing to remember. You're losing money if you don't try to write grants. You're not losing money by writing and not getting funded. Skill building sessions absolutely will help you. This obviously was quick. I actually do teach a multi-day course on grant writing, which is very intense. But the Candid link that's there, most of those webinars are free. Nonprofit Ready is totally free. They have a grant writing essentials. They also have like a financial essentials and board succession planning essentials thing that are all free. Eventbrite, a lot of local communities at libraries have grant writing classes that are free that you can go and attend in person. Also, as Betsy mentioned earlier, the Mountain Association has launched their nonprofit learning community, which is designed for smaller nonprofits to be able to get a lot of support around processes for fundraising and marketing that you need. In the link that I sent out earlier, which I will put again in the chat now, if I can, we'll see. Yep. There are 2 documents in there. My presentation's in there, but there are 2 documents that are the membership agreement and things you should know about the nonprofit learning community if you want to join. If you want, it's free of charge and all those things. It's a great opportunity. It just launched in April, Betsy. I mean, it's brand spanking new, but it's really great. It's a really great opportunity. If you haven't checked it out, I really encourage you to check it out. But again, you learn by writing grants. You learn to write grants by writing grants, period. We don't have a lot of time for questions and comments, but does anybody have anything off the top of their head they want to ask me?
It's been a lot of information, but really great.
Yeah, like I said, it's a lot of information. I tried to squish it all in. Thank you guys so much for all that you do and for coming today. And my email's there. And really, if you have like a general question about grants or a specific question about one that you're writing, I have no problem answering your questions. Like, I'm not going to help write a grant for you. I don't have time for all that. But if you have to say, hey, this is what they're asking, and this is what we need, please just shoot me an email. Like, I really, really enjoy helping organizations, and I am happy to help you and talk through whatever with you. If you have questions that I didn't answer, questions that you think of later, more specific, unique questions, literally just email me. And Betsy will tell you up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning anyway. I'm a night owl, so I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And keep being awesome. Keep doing the great work that you do. Do not get discouraged. The only way out is through. We're all walking each other home at the end of the day. So just thank you so much for everything that you do.